Well, are we becoming a more extreme society? It seems that we're becoming more polarized as a community. So does that mean we're more extreme? How do people even cope with the deep differences that we're experiencing in our culture?
Well, Steve, I have the solution. I'm going to be the peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers. I'm just going to bring peace to the whole world. And if people who are listening to this just hang on to the end of it, you'll see that the solution is for us to be honest, to find real meaning, and ultimately to get the truth from the one who is the truth. It's really interesting in social media how there are these kind of extremes, and they're seeing extreme reactions on the streets and extreme reactions in different ways. I find it fascinating that 30 years ago, I discovered this clip of John Cleese from Monty Python and Fawlty Towers. And this is a 30-year-old clip, and it could have been written for today. In fact, we probably need to think about how much Monty Python were really prophets, but have a look at this clip first.
Seriously though, we've heard a lot about extremism recently, a nastier, harsher atmosphere everywhere, more abuse and bother boy behavior, less friendliness and tolerance and respect for opponents. All right, but what we never hear about extremism is its advantages. Well, the biggest advantage of extremism is that it makes you feel good, because it provides you with enemies. Let me explain. The great thing about having enemies is that you can pretend that all the badness in the whole world is in your enemies and all the goodness in the whole world is in you. Attractive, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of anger and resentment in you anyway, and you therefore enjoy abusing people, then you can pretend that you're only doing it because these enemies of yours are such very bad persons. And that if it wasn't for them, you'd actually be good-natured and courteous and rational all the time. So, if you want to feel good, become an extremist. Okay, now you have a choice. If you join the hard left, they'll give you their list of authorized enemies. Almost all kinds of authority, especially the police, the city, Americans, judges, multinational corporations, public schools, furriers, newspaper owners, fox hunters, generals, class traitors, and, of course, moderates. Or, if you'd rather be an extremist on the hard right, no problem, fine, you still get a lovely list of enemies, only they're different ones. Noisy minority groups, unions, Russia, weirdos, demonstrators, welfare sponges, meddlesome clergy, peaceniks, the BBC, strikers, social workers, communists, and, of course, moderates. And upstart actors. Now, once you're armed with one of these super lists of enemies, you can be as nasty as you like and yet feel your behaviors morally justified. So you can strut around abusing people and telling them you could eat them for breakfast and still think of yourself as a champion of the truth, a fighter for the greater good, and not the rather sad paranoid schizoid that you really are.
Steve, what do you think?
Well, he's not the Messiah, but he's certainly a prophet. So he says that extremism makes people feel good. Unpack what he's getting at there, Dave.
Well, he's saying that if you can condemn other people, so how do you feel good? You feel good if the other people are the racists or the cultural Marxists, or they're the enemy and you're the good guy. And one of the problems here in social media, I think particularly, but in our society as a whole, is that we're not being taught to think rationally. We divide into tribes very quickly, and suddenly everything we post that is what we think, all our tribe go, "Oh, aren't you wonderful?" And anyone dares deviate from that, you're of the devil. And it's really quite extraordinary to watch. I've seen that happen so many times. I'm sure you've witnessed it yourself.
Yeah, look, we talk about virtue signaling, and it's become a sort of a buzzword, a buzz term, but in one sense, you're showing off to your own crowd when you signal your own virtue. You're not trying to convince anyone on the other side. It's a bit like the Pharisees in the New Testament, who sort of picked the issue that people would be impressed by and sort of went with that. Would that be right?
I think it is. I mean, I was quite interested. A magazine I write for, sometimes they did a front cover, Black Lives Matter, and I saw that some of the commentary about it was, the editor writes a piece saying racism is sin. What bravery, what courage. And I'm going, bravery, courage. That, why was that brave? Why was that courageous? Now, I'm not saying he was virtue signaling, but it seems to me that what people do a lot is they show off their credentials. Virtue signaling is when you're telling others that you're in with them, that you're in with the in crowd. It says in the Bible, the wounds of a friend are faithful. I don't think there are many of us who have friends who can wound us. I mean, you hurt me deep, Steve,
Yeah,
but that's good.
I was just about to jump in there and say that. Now, I'll come back to extremism. We shouldn't be virtue signalers as Christians, because we don't have our own virtue, really. That's the guts of the gospel, is our virtue doesn't come from us. But should Christians ever be extremists? I mean, you don't want to be bland and boring and sort of the cup of tea vicar, do you? Does being in the middle mean that's all you are?
Well, can I say that wearing brown is bland and boring? And when you have brown and a brown table and brown chairs and brown, I'm surprised your walls aren't brown. So yes, we don't want to be bland and boring. That's true.
It's an orange couch.
It's an orange couch. Okay, well, we'll go with the orange couch then. Good Elsterman. No, you don't want to be bland and boring. And there's a kind of extremism, I think, that's good. So, for example, you could say extreme love, extreme care, extreme compassion. Often we brand people as extremists who basically don't agree with us. But I think what we're talking about extremist here is the person who takes everything to extremes. There's no middle ground. There's no moderation. There's no nuance in anything. You're either 100% for me or 100% against. And I think the older you get as Christians, I think we should be extremely committed to Jesus Christ and focused on him. And I think in pretty well everything else, we should, okay, man who stands in the middle of a road gets knocked over by a car, as the old Chinese proverb says. But I still think that moderation should be a hallmark of the Christian. You agree? You're very moderate yourself.
I'm very moderate. Look, I'm wearing brown, but hey, salt and light, that's the metaphors we have in scripture for what God's people are like. How can you be salt and light? So not bland and boring, but not extreme. How does the gospel, or how does Jesus actually do that in us and through us?
Well, I think for those who are watching who are Christians, salt and light is just a really, really, really interesting and helpful image that Jesus used. What do we use salt for? We use salt to preserve things, and we use salt to add taste. And I think if we see ourselves in society as preserving what is good and just adding some taste, every time you walk into a room, Steve, there's a touch of taste being added.
It's good taste.
That should be true. Yeah, that should be true for, and yes, good taste. We don't want bad taste. And I think the light thing is really important, because what light shows up the darkness, which can be quite ugly. But I think light also shows us what is good. It shows us the way. And there's a sense in which we as Christians, it's very easy to yell about the darkness, to yell about those evil people over there, but to actually see the goodness and point the way to the one who is good. I think that's the way to go. I mean, it's interesting because on this weekend, I've had a lot to do with racism, talking about it, that is. And on Monday, the last of the events I was involved in was an online cafe with a guy called Ray Galea. You know of him?
Mm-hmm.
It was quite funny because we were talking about the message of Jesus. And in the course of it, he pointed out that he is a Maltese, came from Malta to Australia. Apparently, there are about 400,000 Maltese in Australia, which is unbelievable. I mean, that's just incredible. But anyway, he said in his church in West Sydney, there are 71 different nationalities.
Wow.
And you see Greeks and Turks sitting down together. You see, now that to me is just wonderful in terms of Christ genuinely is the answer to the kind of extremes that we are seeing. And how that works out and can be seen in maybe two extremes, which I want you to read, and you can say anything about them before we go, but from Paul in Galatians 5.
Yeah, well, here's one extreme. Now, the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. And he was going to say, I'll sum that up with Twitter. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now that's a good extreme. Yeah?
It's a beautiful light and dark thing, and I think so much it's what our culture and society needs. Steve, I think we'll leave it there because I honestly think there's just enough in that for us to reflect upon. Those of us who are Christians, and those of you who are not Christians, I want to know, what's your alternative to this? Because to me, it's maybe not the Beatles, all we need is love, but I'm going to say this, I think all we need is Christ, and Christ is love. And there's something really concrete in that. Next week, we're going to look at the Tower of Babel and the funniest advert ever. So I'll let you guess what that one is. But I'll say goodbye, and to my beige colleague over in Perth.
I'll look a bit more extreme next week, people. I'll see you then.